Welcome to Haunted Midnight Stories. Here are 3 true creepy trucker stories. Before we get started, I'm a new channel, and subscribing motivates me to carry on posting new content, as it takes a good amount of time browsing the internet to find the most interesting stories just for you. Thank you. I consider myself a rational man, but my grip on reality has been shaken to the core by the events of the past 48 hours. It was a standard delivery job, a route I've driven countless times before without incident. But something was different this time. Terribly, nightmarishly different. The warehouse foreman was his usual brusque self when I picked up the trailer loaded with auto parts. Nothing out there. It wasn't until I got back on the highway headed south that a creeping unease began to set in. I chalked it up to lack of sleep and too much coffee. But I couldn't ignore the sounds coming from the trailer, like boxes shifting and falling over. I pulled over to check, but everything was still secured tightly. Back on the road, I tried the radio to calm my nerves, but only piercing static came through the speakers. The noise continued sporadically throughout the night, accompanied by banging and scraping that seemed to come from within the very walls of the trailer. No amount of rationalization could explain it away. Exhausted, I pulled into a rest stop as the sky glowed red with dawn. Splashing cold water on my face, I was startled by the face staring back at me in the mirror. My haggard features were accentuated by the harsh fluorescent lights, but there was something else. A dark, sunken quality to my eyes. An unnatural gauntness to my cheeks, as if the very life was draining from me. Shaken, I hurried back outside, only to be greeted by a sight that made my blood run cold. A spindly dark figure perched atop the trailer, watching me with intent. I cried out, but it disappeared in the blink of an eye. The last few hours of the drive passed in a paranoid blur. I jumped at shadows and kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see that dark figure reappear at any moment. The phantom noises continued from the trailer, now accompanied by hushed voices murmuring just below the threshold of comprehension. I cannot say for certain whether they were real or merely auditory hallucinations, born of exhaustion and frayed nerves. Either way, I was unraveling. Arriving at the delivery warehouse, I supervised the unloading with mounting dread, but there was no clandestine stowaway, no damage or sign of tampering. Only plain cardboard boxes that offered no answers. I wasted no time leaving that place behind, hoping distance would restore clarity and reason. I had to cling to the belief that exhaustion and isolation had simply warped my perceptions. Stopping at a roadside diner, I tried to ground myself over a strong cup of coffee. But a discarded newspaper on the counter short-circuited my efforts, its date impossibly 1 week into the future. Before the waitress could approach, I was out the door and back behind the wheel, putting miles between me and that reality-bending route. Now I sit in a motel room, struggling to document the events before they are obscured by doubt and denial. The cocaine-like stimulant of adrenaline has long since worn off, leaving me depleted. Perhaps writing this all down is simply an attempt to impose coherence on chaos, to find meaning in causation where there may be none. But I cannot shake the growing suspicion that I have glimpsed behind the veil and sanity is no longer an option. There are only 2 possibilities. Either there was a malevolent force toying with me, defying all rational explanation, or there was not, and my own mind has come spectacularly undone, cracked through by isolation and sleep deprivation, and the endless hypnosis of highway stripes. Both prospects are terrifying, albeit for different reasons. To confront something beyond comprehension, beyond the known bounds of reality, it contradicts everything we tell ourselves about the world. But on the other hand, to doubt the testimony of my own senses and sanity. What does that leave? The collapse of identity, of trust in oneself. I do not know what really transpired over the course of that 12-hour drive. Perhaps I never will. But I do know that the comforting assumptions about my life and sense of self I had when I picked up that trailer are now utterly shattered. My grip on existence feels tenuous. A whirl of headlights and shadows, phantom radio static, fleeting visages at the periphery. Was there even a figure on the trailer or a newspaper with an impossible future date? Or am I simply a fragmented psyche projecting my own internal darkness? Isig madness is just a failure to recognize contradictions, to connect the dots between irrational perceptions and reality. But what if reality itself is the contradiction? I feel myself poised on the brink between these two abysses of terror, an intrusion of the unexplainable versus my own plummet into the abyss of unreason. With each passing minute, I feel myself slipping closer to one or the other. All I know is that I cannot continue hauling loads down that stretch of highway, not ever again. Something malignant lurks there amid the banal roadside landscapes. Or perhaps the evil is within me, having been there all along but never glimpsed till now. Perhaps this is simply a long overdue reckoning, but I fear my sanity and sense of self may not survive the confrontation. I've been hauling freight across this lonesome stretch of highway for going on 15 years now. Seen a lot of strange sights along the way, but nothing could prepare me for that godforsaken night I pulled into that ramshackle motel off Route 66. The place didn't look like much from the outside, just a dingy single-story building sunk low against the dark sky. Neon vacancy sign buzzing and flickering out front, the ghostly red glow the only light for miles around. Parking lot pitted with potholes filled with brackish rainwater. I hit the brakes and pulled up to the office, gravel crunching under my tires. It was late, and I was bone tired after driving since sunup. All I wanted was a warm bed to lay my head for a few hours before getting back on the road. Stepping out of the truck, the heavy stillness struck me right off. No critters chirping, no coyotes howling at the moon like they do most nights out here in the middle of nowhere. Just dead silence, laying over the motel like a shroud. I shrugged it off, told myself I was just jumpy from being on the road too long. But when I walked into that lobby, a chill went through me that had nothing to do with the cold. The place was empty as a ghost town, just me, and the bored teenage clerk staring at a girly magazine behind the counter. He didn't so much as glance up when I came in, just slid a registration card over without a word. I cleared my throat and asked for a single room. But he still didn't look at me, just took my cash and passed me a key attached to a big plastic fob numbered 12. His dull eyes stayed glued to the pages in front of him, like he couldn't be bothered with another wearied traveler needing a place to lay his head. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just figured the kid was being a typical sullen teenager. But remembering it now, something about his total disinterest strikes me as sinister. Like he knew I was better off getting back in my truck and driving all night. But he took my money and gave me a key anyway. My unease only grew when I stepped into that dingy little room. Shabby beach scene paintings hanging crooked on the walls, carpet stained and matted. The air heavy and stale, reeking of old cigarettes. That sagging, lumpy mattress looked like it hadn't been changed out since the 70s. I tossed my duffel on the rickety wooden table and swept the room out of habit, checking the closet and under the bed, behind the bathroom door, in the shower. Call me paranoid, but motels give me the creeps. You never know what kind of sleazeballs stay there before you. Exhaustion finally won out over my misgivings. I tore off my boots and stretched out atop the nubby bedspread, too beat to strip it off and get under the sheets. Couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me as I lay there in the dark, though. The neon sign buzzed and blinked outside my window all night, casting an eerie red glow on the walls. I kept startling awake, sensing movement outside the door, footsteps shuffling up and down the hall. But each time I crept to the peephole, the hallway was empty, just flickering fluorescent lights reflecting on the scuffed tile floor. Round about 3 a.m., I jolted upright to the sound of someone crying soft and muffled in the next room. At first I figured it was just the TV, some infomercial or late-night soap opera. But the more I listened, the more it sounded like whimpers of fear rather than acting. I sat there frozen, staring into the darkness. Part of me said to leave well enough alone. Wasn't none of my business what was going on next door, but I couldn't just ignore what sounded like someone in real trouble. As quiet as I could, I slid out into that dim hallway, following the cries to the end of the row where a thin band of light shone under the last door. I stood there hesitating, feeling like a trespasser. Then I gave a soft knock. "Everything all right in there?" The cries cut off quick. For a long moment, nothing but silence. Then hushed voices whispering words I couldn't make out, like they was deciding what to do. The hair on my arms stood straight up, icy fingers of fear trailing down my back. Something wasn't right here at all. "It's room 12. I called through the door, working hard to keep my voice steady. just checking if all are okay. More of that eerie whispering. That nothing. I had half a mind to kick that door in, but this wasn't my business, and motel room doors kick back harder than you'd expect. Cursing under my breath, I hurried back to the lobby to get the manager. But when I got there, the clerk's chair was empty, just a half-crushed pack of cigarettes left on the counter. "Hello? Anybody here?" My own voice echoed back at me in the gloom. I stood there feeling helpless, then started leaning on that bell over and over until I finally heard shuffling footsteps emerging from a back room. The man that appeared was stooped and withered, hair slicked back with pomade gone gray at the roots. His coveralls were stained dark with grease, and his rheumy eyes regarded me with suspicion. "What's all this racket then?" he grumbled, jaw working a wad of tobacco. I quickly explained the situation, how I'd heard what sounded like someone crying in the room down the way. His leathery face turned grave as I talked, deep lines etching into his forehead. "Best you go on and mind your own affairs, son," he said. "This place has stories, sure enough, but folks around here take a dim view of gossip." I started to ask what he meant, but just then the clerk slunk back and reeking of cigarette smoke. He scurried over and whispered something in the old man's ear that I couldn't catch. They exchanged a look that turned my blood to ice. The manager turned back to me, eyes hard. "We don't want no trouble now here. You pay up, be on your way come sunrise. Understand me?" I didn't understand nothing about what was happening here, but had enough sense left to know arguing would get me nowhere good. Backing slowly away, I said, "Yes, sir, no problem here. Have a good night now." Those cold eyes stayed pinned on me as I retreated down the hallway like a dog beat for stealing scraps from the table. I barely slept another wink that night, let me tell you. Kept hearing those muffled cries echoing in my memory, seeing those unfriendly faces warning me off. Come first light, I threw my gear in the truck and burned rubber getting gone from that place. Only looked back once in the rear view, them flickering neon lights fading away like ghosts. Something evil was holed up in that place, no doubt about it. And I don't aim to ever stop there again, not if I can help it. Because there are dark things lurking in forgotten places that truckers like me ain't equipped to handle alone out here at night. Alls I know is I'm grateful to have made it out unscathed. Though the memory still raises goosebumps on my arms even now, thinking on it. Could have been me crying out for help behind that locked door, and no one the wiser come morning. But like that canker-hearted manager said, folks out here don't take kindly to gossip or digging up things best left buried. So I'll close this page and keep on driving, leaving the shadows behind. Just another strange tale to share over coffee and cigarettes at some far-flung truck stop someday. If I'm ever fool enough to stop at that motel again, maybe then I'll learn its secrets once and for all. But praying I'm wiser now, and those neon vacancy lights stay dim in my rear view from here on out. My name's Jack, and I'm a trucker, but driving big rigs across this country for going on 20 years now. I've seen things on the lonesome highways that make most folks' skin crawl. Strange lights in the sky, odd sounds in the middle of nowhere, feelings of being watched by unseen eyes, but nothing compared to the living nightmare I went through last week. It started out like any other job, picked up a full trailer of hazardous chemicals outside Dallas, headed for a facility up in Wisconsin. Did my usual triple check on the rig, made sure the drums were secured proper, grabbed some coffee and hit the road as the sun went down. The first leg of the trip was smooth sailing. Rolled across the Oklahoma border around midnight, still wide awake thanks to that coffee. Stop at a truck stop just shy of Oklahoma City to fuel up and grab some grub. Chatted with another driver who said there were storms up ahead. Told him I'd keep an eye out. If there's one thing old Jack knows, it's how to handle bad weather. Ain't no thunder and lightning that'll slow me down. Back on the highway, the landscape opened up wide and empty. The kind of lonesome stretch of road that lets a man think. Miles of inky pavement unfurling under my tires. Stars blazing bright above me. I flipped on the radio, but could only tune in some crackling static and voices murmuring in languages I didn't recognize. Strange, thought I must be passing through a dead zone. A few odd garbled voices didn't bother me none. I'd heard strange things on the radio before. Occupational hazard, when you spend your life hauling loads across the backways of America. The first inkling that something wasn't right came about an hour later. In my high beams, I spotted what looked like roadkill sprawled across the oncoming lane. As I passed by, I realized with a shock it weren't no possum or raccoon. It was a human body, mangled and broken, face frozen in an expression of pure terror. I slammed the brakes, heart lurching, grabbed my flashlight and jumped out, scouring the dark roadside for any sign of who'd done this. But there were nothing to see. Not another vehicle, no skid marks, no footprints. Almost like that poor soul had fallen right out of the sky. A cold chill ran through me and I hurried back to the safety of my rig. Couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched from the shadows. I gunned the engine and put some miles between me and that troubling scene. Tried to tell myself it was just some drunk driver lost control. But my gut said different. That weren't no ordinary car wreck. Something evil had happened there. The deeper I drove into the night, the thicker the fog rolled in, blanketing the land in a shifting veil of white. I slowed to a crawl, peering through the mist, watchful for any surprise hazards in the road. Out of nowhere, a figure materialized in my beams. Looked like a hitchhiker on the shoulder, thumb out. I braked hard, but too late. Felt the sickening thump as I struck him. I leaped out, terrified I'd killed a man. But there were nothing. No body, no vented fender. Yet I knew I'd hit someone. I felt the impact, heard the crunch of bone. How could there be no trace? A cold finger of fear traced my neck. Something supernatural was happening here. I drove on, increasingly unnerved. The highway through Kansas stretched ahead of me for miles, shrouded in fog. Strange shapes darted through the haze, keeping pace with my truck no matter how hard I gunned the engine. Signs appeared distorted, written in languages I couldn't comprehend. The radio fizzled and popped, blaring shrieks and wails that didn't sound human. I finally pulled into a roadside motel, desperate for sleep. But rest wouldn't come. The minute I lay down, the whispers started, voices murmuring, chanting words I strained to understand but couldn't. Shadows slid beneath the door, stretched across the walls. The streaks from the radio split the air. After a sleepless hour, I leaped up shouting, heart hammering, drenched in cold sweat. I weren't going to lay down again in this place. I had it gone. Dawn's light only amplified the strangeness as I continued my route. The highway shimmered oddly, like a mirage. Trees bent at impossible angles. Mile markers counted backward, as if I was going in reverse. My GPS kept sending me down empty rural routes, insisting this was the way before resetting back to the interstate. I felt an almost suffocating dread, like the fog itself was pressing in on me. I weren't in Kansas anymore. Somehow I crossed over into a nightmare land. Exhausted and rattled, I finally reached the Wisconsin border. But the evil strangeness wasn't done tormenting me yet. As I pressed on for the facility, shapes leaped at my windshield. Spectral deer, shadow wolves, horrors I couldn't put a name to. I'd swerve, hear the thump of impact, only to find no sign I'd hit anything at all. No blood or fur, just my own hammering heart. The landscape deteriorated, all logic fled. The sun flickered like a strobe, throwing stark light and shadow. The road beneath my tires undulated like a writhing serpent. The radio blared piercing feedback, undercut with chanting in that awful unknown tongue. In the blur of trees, I glimpsed impossible creatures, half-glimpsed nightmares my mind couldn't process. I tasted fear, the primal terror of prey being toyed with by something beyond its comprehension. And then, just as abruptly, it was over. I pulled into the chemical facility, my vision clear, the sun high and bright. Men in hazmat suits calmly unloaded my cargo while I stared numbly. No one else seemed to register anything wrong, but I knew I'd escaped something evil. Not a dream, not psychosis. A living nightmare that fed on my fear as I battled to escape its clutches. Maybe I'll tell my tale someday and folk'll say I lost my wits. Blame it on sleep deprivation, hormones, LSD flashbacks. Say old Jack blew a tire and banged his head. Imagined it all. But I know what I witnessed. I always did believe there were strange forces in this world beyond our seeing. Patient, hungry things lurking unseen in the void, wishing harm on humanity. Most days, they leave well enough alone. But sometimes, they'd find one man traveling alone, turn their gaze his way, decide to play. I won't claim to know their motive or nature. All I know is I glimpsed the hungry dark that waits just past the firelight, Velvet's claws and fangs strip my sanity, and I know I'll never drive that desolate highway again. Call it superstition if you want, but as for me and my rig, we're avoiding that damned road for good. If you enjoy these stories, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you had similar encounters, please share your experiences too. Thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe as it supports me a lot.